All right. I think it's time to go ahead. Hi, Travis. So you are all in Decoupled Horizons, talk about Drupal's next decade. Hopefully you're in the right place. My name is Gabe Solis. You might call me a career Drupalist. I started developing Drupal websites when I was in college before I dropped out, and I got a job building Drupal websites at a Drupal agency, and then I worked at a Drupal company. It's been Drupal my whole career. Since then, I've become really fascinated in HTTP APIs and how Drupal can serve them. And that led me to work on the JSON API module, the API First initiative, the Decoupled Menus initiative, which you just heard about earlier today. The reason I included that slide is someone told me that I was supposed to build credibility with you all, my audience. So my intention was kind of to impress you with some credentials and hope that you'd see I've been thinking about APIs and decoupled Drupal for a really long time. But I suspect that the wise ones among you are going to take something else away. And that's that I have a big old decoupled Drupal hammer, and everything looks like a decoupled Drupal nail to me. I probably should have told you I dropped out of college too. So anyway, if there's anything else you should know about me and in this presentation, it's that I'm going to ask a lot of questions, like a lot of questions. And I'm not going to be giving many answers. Instead, my idea is kind of to invite you all to think about them, and I'm going to trust you to come to the answers on your own. So this presentation is about Drupal's next decade. And it seems like the first question has to be, how will Drupal change over that time period? There are a few ways we could try to answer that. For example, we could start by asking how Drupal changed over the past decade. And if we understood that, maybe we'd be able to project some trends out into the future. But even before we can answer that question, we have to ask a more basic one. Did Drupal change over the past decade? And the answer is obviously yes, right? We released Drupal 8 and 9, didn't we? When did we do that? Drupal became more responsive over that time period. We got Layout Builder, improvements in JSON API went into core. We improved Drupal's multilingual capabilities, and we made some improvements to content revisioning. But does that pass the mom test? You know, my friend Peter and I, we kind of have this running joke where we tell each other about how we try to explain to our moms what the hell we do for a job. And you know, the best explanation that I've been able to come up with is that we build website builders. And as far as I can tell, that applies as much as today as it did 10 years ago. Sure, we care about mobile devices. We configure different tools for content authors, but my mom doesn't really know what that means. Drupalists either build websites, construct website builders for their clients, or contribute to the website builder themselves. In other words, Drupal's code may have become more capable. It may have gotten new features and improved some existing ones, but I'm not convinced that the overall product evolved very much. So that line of questioning might not bear a lot of fruit. If the trend line is kind of flat, I'm not ready to believe that Drupal will be a website builder in another 10 years. So maybe we can try a different question, a different line of questioning. What is Drupal? In the words of Michael Scott, next slide, please. Jokes aside, my mom thinks Drupal is a website builder, but you all probably think it's a content management system, and Wikipedia says it's a web application framework. But the truth is that it's an open source project and it's modular, so Drupal's what you make of it. So let's try another line of questioning. Maybe the third time's a charm. Why Drupal? Why don't we all just use some other software? For myself, it's because I believe the web should be for everyone. I think the web should bring people together and it should enable them to achieve things at scales that weren't possible before. I think the web ought to broaden our vision, you know, of what experiences we can share with one another. There's this example here at a micro scale of where Dries is sharing, you know, a more intimate moment over the web. And at a macro scale, The web lets us bring together a global audience interested in building the web itself. Kind of no matter how or where someone uses the web, whether they're using it to continue serving customers during their pandemic, or whether it's their application runs in a vehicle, or on a billboard, or on a phone, the web empowers individuals and organizations of any size, whether it's a cafe, or Ford Motors. It allows them to communicate and to collaborate with a group of people, usually toward their vision of a better world. But does that answer the question, why Drupal? And I have a few more questions then. Why is Drupal open source? Why does our community advocate so strongly for the open web? Why do we have so many passionate contributors? And why do I always get this sense that we're all on a mission, a mission to help the world? Aren't we really just trying to make Drupal the best damn tool to build the web? Don't you get excited when you see people using Drupal to build things that bring them together and help them achieve their own missions? So then what's the web? I think a lot of us have this convenient but maybe misleading definition of the web in our heads. We take a mental shortcut and we maybe think that the term web, refers to the collection of all web pages in the world. And then if we were to try and define what a web page was or is, I think we'd probably say that web pages are uniquely written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that they're always rendered by web browsers. I think that maybe that definition doesn't do the web a lot of justice. It's a definition overshadowed by this past where a connection to the internet and a really adequate display was only available through a desktop computer and later smartphones. But I don't know if that's true anymore. The internet is kind of everywhere, and pretty much every imaginable device is capable of accessing the web. So let's ask the answer machine. What's the web? The web is an information system where web resources are identified by URLs which are accessible over the internet and which may be interlinked. It's kind of cheating a little bit, isn't it? What's a web resource? Is that a PNG image? And is that a web resource? It's not HTML. It's not CSS. It's not JavaScript. Can JSON be a web resource? If JSON can be a web resource, could we create something like Wikipedia with JSON? Should we create information systems like Wikipedia with JSON? Are HTML and web browsers doing a bad job? Isn't an HTML page kind of the perfect medium for something like a Wikipedia article? But do all information systems, do they have to use HTML? And do they all use a browser? Isn't this map, is that an internet accessible web resource? Does that mean that these images could be web resources too? Are they already? Hold on. Has the web moved beyond the browser in the last decade? If it hasn't, are we okay with that? If we believe that the web, and I believe that the web is for everyone and its power is to bring people together, is it okay that we're surrounded by the internet and the web isn't there? It doesn't seem right to me. Surely the web has moved beyond the browser. What if it's already everywhere? What if the web is all around us? Aren't we trying to make Drupal the best damn tool to build the web? Is Drupal the best damn tool to build the web? A decade from now, do we still want Drupal to be just a website builder? If not, can we turn Drupal into the best damn tool for building a web that's beyond the browser? If not, then why is Drupal open source? Why does our community advocate so strongly for the open web? Why do we have so many passionate contributors? And why do I have this sense that we're on the mission to help the world? So what should a web builder look like? Do appearances matter? Would you be able to control how a web browser and a web resource appeared on a billboard? Would you send CSS to a native application on an iPhone or an Android device? Would you need a theme? Would your content need to appear differently in different places? Would you need to lay out blocks on a watch? Would you be able to lay out blocks without HTML? Would you need different display modes for different devices? Would a tool like that need a media library? Would user accounts still be an important feature? Would you want to log into your car? Maybe as a manufacturer, would you want to authenticate that a web request for one of your web resources was actually coming from one of your cars and not some script kiddie? Would a native app need URL aliases? Would a tool like that need to serve a dashboard? I guess, would a web builder maybe look a lot like Drupal? If we look at that screen, wouldn't it need cache performance? Wouldn't we need logging and errors? Would we need configuration syncing? In other words, how will Drupal change over the next decade? How do you think it's going to change over the next decade? Do you have an idea? So I hope that all of these questions that I asked maybe sparked some thoughts and ideas. I told you that I wasn't going to provide any answers, and I'm not planning on it. But maybe I can rewind a little bit and talk and walk through some of the thoughts that those questions sparked for me. So how will Drupal change over the next decade? It's a really big question. And when I think about that question, I think about all the failed attempts to predict the future. It's not clear to me that we can answer this question at all, but we might be able to understand one way in which it could. If I think about how Drupal would change, and I do look at our past decade, I have to wonder if Drupal changed a lot. If Drupal changed, we added all those things. We added media library, or we made it part of core. And we added JSON API. We added better content revisioning. Internationalization became a bigger and a better thing, a bigger part of Drupal core. But if you were to take somebody who was used to Drupal 6 and plop them into a Drupal 9 site and soon to be a Drupal 10 site, would they be very lost? I think they'd find their way around pretty quickly. That's a good thing, but it means that the product didn't change all that much. And so I wonder, what changes could we make that would change the product itself? And of course, should we change that? Kind of fly through these, talking about, does it pass the mom test? If in 10 years I have to, well, if I say to my mom, I still build websites, I'm wondering if I am doing something for a web of the past, not of the future, or even of the present. So what is Drupal? Right? Could we learn something from what Drupal is and then project that into the future, or say we're going to be something different now? We'd have to ask ourselves, what is Drupal? But it's this kind of thing where I've been asking myself that for like 10 years, and it's always changing. Every time I build a Drupal site or I work on a Drupal feature, it's in a new use case, and I'm seeing Drupal in a slightly different way. I don't think we can answer what Drupal is. It's too big, it's too complex. It changes inside the code base and the way you piece it together, right? It's building blocks. It's like asking, what is Legos? It's like, I don't know, you could build a starship or something. So why Drupal? Could we make a consistent narrative about Drupal's mission, about its purpose? And I think we can. And I think our past success and maybe our current success is really driven by that mission, not necessarily the code itself, but the way in which Drupal helps people. So you can think about things being at a very small scale. One of the things that brought a lot of people to Drupal early on was the fact that it just made it easy to publish your blog, and it had an automatic RSS feed. And that RSS feed, it was available out of the box, and it helped people find your content. And then at really big scales, we're managing the DrupalCon website through Drupal. So it's a different thing, but what is it doing? It's bringing people together. We're sharing information, communication, and we're collaborating with one another through Drupal. So in all of those cases, it was people were using Drupal to do something on the web, to accomplish a mission. And so I think that's going to continue, right? People are still going to use Drupal to accomplish their missions. But the web is changing. If we're going to make it the best damn tool, how would we do that? So what's the web? I think for a long time, kind of thought that the internet was everything which you could access with HTTP, or over a TCP connection and use a domain name or something. But over time, I started to think that the web was really just web browsers and websites and web pages. But there's a concept of web resources. When I think about JSON and I ask, can JSON be a web resource? I think it is. It certainly can be. And I've heard the term web pages and websites thrown around. But I've also heard about web services. Aren't those part of the web? So when I look at examples and I see this thing and I ask myself, do information systems always use a web browser? I don't think so. This dashboard on the car is an information system, and it has a lot of the constraints that we might be able to offer and help with. For example, I think about the bottom of that menu there, or the bottom of that dashboard. You can see the little car and the music icon, the photos, or I guess it's a fan to turn things on. That's a menu. That's something that Drupal may know something about. We could reorder that. Every time you want to change that menu at the bottom of the screen, do you really need to ship a firmware update to it? Or could it be powered by a central, application management system, a content management system for applications beyond the browser? And I see things like this, and I think, man, the internet's connected to us in all kinds of different ways. It's certainly not in the browser. And so if I ask myself, has the web moved beyond the browser? I think it definitely has to have. If it hasn't, then we're going to be stuck with people accessing the internet through these closed ecosystems, these closed platforms, something like YouTube or Twitter. It's not necessarily the web. It's not open. It's not available for everybody at any scale, an individual, to actually create something for the web that's not using a browser. So to kind of zoom through this a little bit, if we look at Drupal, what should a web builder look like? And I'm not sure. There's things like the appearances tab. Do they matter in a world like that? Do they matter where the internet and the web is connected to a phone and this giant billboard in your car? Would you have themes? I'm not sure that you would, but websites are a part of the web. And so if you were building a web builder, you'd probably still want to serve front ends that do render in the browser. I asked a question, would you send CSS to a native application? And the answer is probably no, but you would send it to a website, and that's a perfectly valid use case for the web. So maybe we shouldn't lose that as we decouple Drupal, or as we think about what Drupal would be going forward. Would your content need to appear differently in different places? For me, I think that's yes. My content's going to appear differently, whether it applies on a mobile device or on a desktop, but it's also going to appear differently if it's on a billboard. There's no interaction there. Drupal has these concepts already. Like if you see these installed themes, there are 3 different things that Drupal has knowledge of. And right now, Drupal is really focused on the browser. And so for the most part, you just pick one, set it as the default, and that's the theme that's available everywhere. But Drupal does have the concept of a theme negotiator, and it's able to kind of understand the context in which a user is accessing the system and change the theme. So you could potentially have something that knows that the request is coming from a billboard, and therefore it should serve the billboard theme, which would maybe have like a very stripped down version of HTML. And that might be at like billboard.example.com, and you might have www.example.com for your website. But you could manage that with Drupal. You could build for the web using Drupal in all its different outlets. Would it need to lay out blocks on a watch? That actually could be kind of cool. You know, if we could figure out how to ship block layout in a way that didn't necessarily rely on HTML, but that you could consume in maybe Swift or something like that, that would be really powerful, and it would be an interesting way to use the web. Display modes are a thing which we already have a concept for, and we could certainly leverage and make more available toward to site builders, people who don't necessarily want to do much coding. They could have different modes for different contexts. Drupal already has things like a media library. In a world where you're sending content to a whole bunch of different devices, or you're seeing it presented in a lot of different places, or even if you just want to use Drupal to manage maybe your own personal social media presence, you'd push images out to Twitter, but you might want to kind of retain data sovereignty of them. You might want to control them all in one place. I think about people who are on YouTube, and a lot of them, have all of their a decade of their life's work stored on YouTube and aggregated by YouTube, and they're relying on the YouTube algorithm to present it to their viewers. But I think that a lot of them maybe are afraid of being demonetized or deplatformed, and we don't have to talk about the morality of that, but Drupal could be a way to take some sovereignty back over all of that content you're pushing out and make sure that your subscribers aren't tied to the YouTube platform, tied to Google, this massive corporate conglomerate. I think it kind of brings back us to maybe our roots, where Drupal shipped RSS feeds to out of the box. Would a web builder need user accounts? And maybe not in all cases, but what if the user accounts, it just said clients or consumers? Could we use bundles to have different kinds of accounts? One could be vehicles and another could be person, and they would have different fields, but they would both be able to authenticate with Drupal. So Drupal might already look a lot like a web builder. It's just focused on browsers right now. And I think that we just need to maybe change the perspective we bring to Drupal, and think about unique and innovative ways that we might piece it together and take those building blocks and fit them back together into something new for a web that has changed since a lot of the first ideas of what Drupal should be and what that tool should look like really got solidified. So to end this, do you guys have any questions? I'll go over to Q&A now. Let's see here. No question yet. I know there have been questions in the chat. So David Wang, Gabe Solis, why does Drupal need to have an expansive, broad capability set? Why can't Drupal be great at 2 or 3 things that is strongly opinionated about and focus solely on those? It certainly can. Although I think that our mission has been to help people make things for the web and kind of democratize, to bring the web closer to people who might not necessarily be coders, or have really deep pockets. If you're building like a dashboard for a Tesla screen, you need very, very deep pockets. And obviously, of course, if you're building a dashboard for a vehicle, that's kind of a given. But if tools to use the web in new ways, that think beyond the browser and think about how the web helps society, were more accessible, were cheaper, were open source, were free to use, I think that we'd see a lot of innovation in that space, and we'd see people using Drupal in ways that they haven't thought about before. And I think that would be really good for Drupal as a project and kind of as a mission. All right, let's see. I don't see any other questions. Travis, yeah, he says the appearance menu does imply the centrality of HTML presentation to the extent that it's not removable or disableable. I think about like the appearances screen, and it would be really useful if that appearance screen maybe said applications. What if when you went there, you instead of choosing the theme you wanted, you chose the application, and you were able to say you were able to set up the context in which people were viewing your content, like a watch or something. My timer says I'm at 29 minutes. I'm not sure exactly how much time I have. I think I have maybe 4 more minutes or 3. Okay, there's something in the Q&A. Is it Drupal's job to help people host their web resources? Yeah. I don't know. If people are using the web and they need resources out there, they could certainly go to something like Bluehost or AWS and put web resources on there. But that implies a lot of maybe technical savvy. And at some point, it gets unmanageable, and you might want a system to manage that content or those resources. So yeah, for a tool that helps people use the web, maybe it should help them kind of curate their web resources. Peter asks, do you think we need a different set of admin UI for different types of web resources? Yeah, I'm not sure if, I'm going to assume that's about the UI itself, like the interface. And I think it would. I think we'd need to, well, it may actually look the way it does. I think there's been a lot of work in the past few years to make the UI reflect more of the presentation. Things like Layout Builder have helped with that. Paragraphs, layout paragraphs, they're all helping people visualize the output, but we may actually have to go backward a little bit and say that the editing form has to be more generic because we cannot possibly predict the context in which that content is going to be viewed. Usman asked, although one could ask the question, why would Drupal has to be at the core to offer their solutions when content is going beyond browser? Why not horses for courses route? I'm sorry, I don't understand that question. Scott says, Drupal is a channel to communicate, and it changed in the last 10 years to make that easier, and it seems like the path forward as well. Drupal is a channel to communicate, and it changed in the last 10 years to make that easier, and that seems like the path forward as well. Yeah, I mean, the web is a communication platform, and so we have to keep changing as the web changes, as those channels change. WhatsApp wasn't a thing. People are using, that's the internet, and people are using that to communicate with one another. People are using Zoom. That didn't exist 10 years ago, and if it did, it certainly wasn't widespread. And I don't think I'll read this question, but I'm not sure I'll have time to answer. Need the process to be budgetable and manageable with secure and affordable cloud hosting. What cloud hosting options available with managed updates and security, etc. Yeah, there are lots of hosts. Some of them are more expensive than others. We probably should think about how complicated Drupal is to host. We started with the LAMP stack, and that was the easiest way to get started on the web, but it's not now. You know, Heroku is out there. Docker containers are out there. Like the easiest way might be to pay for Kubernetes as a service and just deploy a Docker container. Maybe we should use, you know, the general projects that we got from the decoupled menus to have an official Drupal core Docker container that makes it really easy for people to start using Drupal to build stuff on the web. All right, I think I'm at time. Thank you, everybody.